COVID quarantine crisis has altered all of our schedules, but perhaps you've been surprised by the adjustment that you've had to your time. As we prepare for life to return to normal at one stage, we ought to consider what happens when the schedule stopped. A number of years ago, we were on a roller coaster ride at a theme park, and all of a sudden that roller coaster that was going up and down and up and down stopped at the top of a hill. There must have been a technological problem somewhere, because in a few minutes it would start again. But I remembered thinking, that's how life feels at times, doesn't it? It's moving so fast up and down that we never really pause and stop to consider if we're really spending our time in the schedule properly. There's a wonderful verse in the Bible that talks about time, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15, and this is what we read. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Now this passage has wonderful instruction for us, but I just want to point out 4 ideas that when the time stops and we can readjust, 4 things we should do. I'm going to call them 4 steps. Here they are. Analyze, prioritize, biblicize, exercise. Here's the first one. Analyze. Am I wasting time without realizing it? The text says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time. Look carefully is an interesting phrase. It challenges us to diligently evaluate our use of time. The word carefully is translated in other biblical passages as closely, exactly, accurately. It brings to mind an analytical evaluation, one that focuses on the details, not the generalities. This is a really good word for us as a starting point for time. We rarely think of time in small increments, minutes or seconds. Rather, we tend to think in terms of days and weeks. But I would encourage you, think carefully how you walk. Analyze the time. When we are caught up on the treadmill of life, and when we can't get everything done, we are living kind of like we're going into debt, because we assume we'll make, like the one going into debt assumes he'll make more money later. The compulsive shopper and the procrastinator have a similar problem. They are frivolous with a God-given resource. For the spendthrift, it's about dollars. For the procrastinator, it's just about minutes. The solution for both is to look carefully how they walk. They need to live by a budget. One needs to carefully plan how he'll spend his money. The other needs to carefully plan how he'll spend his time. Now, a few years ago, I needed to analyze my time because I found that I was growing increasingly discouraged with the events of my life. Maybe you've had that experience. Each week, it felt like Friday came upon me way too fast, leaving an increasing amount of unfinished tasks. Now, those unfinished jobs cluttered my desk and, frankly, they cluttered my mind. I could begin to feel the emotional weariness that comes from falling further behind. I confessed my struggle to a friend and a mentor, and he challenged me to keep a journal of my daily activities in 15-minute increments, and to do that for 2 weeks. I remember thinking, I don't have the time to do this. I can't complete my unfinished projects now, and you want me to spend my time recording activities every 15 minutes? But out of respect for his wisdom, I began the process. It was both humbling and revealing. After 2 weeks, I began to see patterns in my life. I discovered areas where I was both unproductive and inefficient. I could also see where some of my relationships were getting the time they needed, while others, because I hadn't planned properly, were getting an inordinate amount of time. Having not made priority-based decisions about my time, I was at the mercy of whoever called and thought that what they had to say was important. At the end of the journaling, I had to admit I was not making the best use of my time, a truth I would not have discovered if I had not taken time to analyze. Heed the biblical warning. Look carefully how you walk. I would encourage you, maybe that's what you should do. During this quarantine time, start to track how you use your time and make that a pattern when time goes back to normal. Step 2, prioritize. Prioritize. Am I investing time in what is truly important? Notice again the text. Look carefully how you walk, analyze, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time. The wisdom issue is always one that speaks to priority, how we will spend our time. Now, the second phrase in this biblical passage, making the best use of time, also speaks of priorities. Paul's not comparing good and bad, implying a moral decision. He's speaking of better and best, underscoring a priority-based decision. Some translations render this with the phrase, redeeming the time. Redeem is a biblical word with a rich heritage. It literally means to buy back for the purpose of setting free, as if we're purchasing time for the sake of freedom. Now, that's good news for you if you've shackled yourself with a lot of unfinished tasks. We need to make better use of our time. We need to make decisions in light of chosen priorities. The Bible often speaks of priorities. Consider two familiar passages. But seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added onto you. See the priority position of the kingdom of God. And how about this? And this is the first commandment, priority. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, one of the areas where laziness slips in for many of us is in the setting of priorities. When we don't establish our priorities and make choices in light of them, we will find out that often those decisions are made for us. Whoever has the most urgent need is the one we end up trying to help. Then, out of necessity, we'll put off what's really important because the less important task has risen to that level of urgency. Jesus makes the same observation when he addresses Martha. She was doing the urgent task, not the important one. In fact, listen to the reading from Luke chapter 10. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him, that is Jesus, and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but only one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. See how Mary set a priority, a good decision over something that was better over something that was simply a good decision. In fact, one writer has said, Martha also wanted to hear Jesus, but the tyranny of the urgent prevented her from doing this. Martha was too easily distracted by the less important things. There is a need to focus on what is most important, for although serving is good, sitting at Jesus' feet is best. So just by way of reminder, setting priorities means we ask what is really important, not simply what is urgent. Now, typically what we have tried to do in the old American dream is to jam as much in as possible. And when we do that, we forget that it's not just about time in the schedule, but it's also about energy. Tim Challis words it this way: getting things done is not only a matter of managing your time, but also a matter of managing your energy. In many vocations and in many places in life, it is energy, not time, that is the more valuable commodity. Like time, energy is limited and needs to be used strategically. Know yourself. At what times of the day are you at your peak? Are you a morning person, a night owl, or a mid-afternoon warrior? Great thoughts, reminding us that we must prioritize not only our time, but when we will be the most energetic for the task that is ahead of us. I don't know about you, but in our neighborhood, I've seen a change in the quarantine. More people are out walking, a different set of priorities. Families are spending more time together, a different set of priorities. Neighbors are talking when they used to be too busy to do so. In fact, I had a pastor share with me recently. He's found his devotional life has become consistent and more meaningful. I've noticed the same in my time with the Lord. I've wondered if maybe we're starting to engage for the first time because everything stopped in what is really important, not simply what is urgent. And that brings us to step 3. Analyze, prioritize. Step 3 is biblicize. Now we want to ask the question, am I determining what is truly important from biblical values? The text says, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 17. Now, to truly discern how to handle your time differently, you'll need to analyze what you're doing wrong with your time, and you'll need to make a list of priorities. But ultimately, you must also remember that you are a steward of that time, not its owner. When you begin to see you are a steward of time, you'll treat it differently. Remember, it's God's will in this verse that we're after, not our own. And that is why the apostle warns us, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Now note the phrase in the passage that we want to be wise, not unwise. The Bible speaks a lot about wisdom. And Psalm 90, verse 12, reveals an important step in attaining it. It says, so teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. The ESV Study Bible says this refers especially to the ability to make the most of one's days, since they are so few. The heart of wisdom would enable the faithful to live by the right priorities. If you struggle with putting things off or procrastination, then you don't number your days, you presume upon them. You're not counting down the time, you assume you have more of it. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross once said, it is only when we truly know and understand that we have a limited time on earth and that we have no way of knowing when our time is up, that we will begin to live each day to the fullest as if it was the only one we had. That is why the wise person in Psalm 90 is likened to a meticulous accountant. He sees time as a limited resource, and he will be selective in his investment of his time. Now, a practical way that I have found to number my days, to keep my priorities, is to list out my roles of responsibility. Now, these roles require different times and different commitments. For example, here are some of mine. These are the personal responsibilities that God has entrusted to me. And I'd encourage you at some stage in this process, while you have some time, to do the same. This is how we biblicize. I would say that I am a Christian. I am a husband. I am a father. I am an employee, in my situation, a pastor. I am a student. I am a mentor. I'm still learning as well as instructing others. Now, these roles, you'll notice, are all relational. They involve my interaction with others in real time. If you're lazy, you will let others determine the use of your time based upon their perceived needs. But when you let others define your roles, you will move from the important and you'll move back into the realm of the urgent. For instance, the culture, or maybe your church, will tell you what you should do as a Christian. See, my role is a Christian, but others will tell me what to do. I'm an employee. Perhaps your boss will tell you what you should do as an employee, which usually means for many, more work with less help. Your spouse will attempt to hold you to their expectations of your weekend, and your kids will make demands on your time morning, noon, and night. If we only go and make decisions by what others tell us in our responsibilities, you will begin to find that you are no longer dealing with the important, but rather the urgent. Now, our pop culture, they counter with all of those demands by others. They will tell you you need to spend more time on yourself. But I don't think that's accurate, not according to the Bible. This position forgets the truth that time was never yours or theirs. It was a gift from God and should have been used accordingly. You steward it. This is why simply listing your responsibilities is not sufficient to accomplish them. You'll need to clarify how you are to spend your time in these roles. Now, I have found, again, the scriptures to be a tremendous help when it comes to defining our roles and responsibilities. Occasionally, you just have to make up a word to make your point, and that's why I call it biblicize. It's the kind of word that says I analyze, I prioritize, and then I ask the Bible what I'm supposed to do with my roles and responsibilities. If I'm really serious about doing the will of God, remember that's the verse, then I will need to get serious about understanding what the Word of God says about my responsibilities. If you don't let the scriptures inform your specific responsibilities, I'm just going to tell you, others will define those responsibilities for you. Notice how even just a handful of biblical passages help you clarify these roles. Let me take mine again, and I'll show you. As a Christian, Matthew tells me I am to love God and love the people around me. As a husband, I read in Ephesians 5 that I am to love my wife sacrificially and live with her, 1 Peter 3, in an understanding way. As a father, I am to instruct my kids in their relationship with the Lord, Deuteronomy 6. I'm to discipline them if necessary, Ephesians 6, and I'm to avoid provoking them to anger, Ephesians 6:4. As an employee or as a pastor, I am to spend time in the Word and prayer, Acts chapter 6 and 2 Timothy 4. And I'm supposed to spend time in community with those in our church, 1 Corinthians 12. As a student, I'm to discover and apply God's truth to my life. Ezra 7:10 said that Ezra had set his heart to study the Word, to practice it, and then to teach it. And finally, as a mentor, I am to seek out, instruct, and encourage the next generation. 2 Timothy 2:2, these things commit to faithful men. So all I've done really is to take biblical passages and apply those to my roles and responsibilities. You can do the same. And when you do that, you begin to biblicize. You determine your various roles and responsibilities from the Bible. And when you've done that, you've completed step 3. Analyze, prioritize, biblicize. But we have one step left. Step 4, exercise. And it has nothing to do with your physical exercise, though that would be a worthwhile endeavor. It has to do with exercising what I'll call self-control. In Ephesians chapter 5, again, we read, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Am I applying self-control with the use of my time? Here's 3 ways you can begin to apply self-control and buy back your time today. Exercise self-control by doing the hardest task first. Years ago, I discovered that if the first task I chose to do was the one I didn't want to do, I usually had time left over to do the things that I enjoyed. But if I had started with the things that I enjoyed, I never seemed to have time to do the difficult task that I was avoiding at the end of the day. The struggling student plays video games before he studies for tomorrow's test. The stressed out dad races home from work to fit in 9 holes of the golf course instead of spending time with his demanding 3-year-old son. We tend to do the task we enjoy first because we enjoy it, and we find out that we haven't left sufficient time for the task least preferred. Self-control is needed to take on the hardest task first. I have friends who used to tell their teenage kids regarding the difficult things, we always eat the frog first. Spirit-empowered self-control is needed to consistently develop that pattern. A simple way to do this is to make a list of your unfinished tasks, and then after you've prioritized them, take the one you are least fond of and move it to the head of the list. And once you've completed the hardest task, then you can begin to go after the other. Here's the second way that you can exercise self-control, by doing what you do in moderation. In his book, Respectable Sins, author Jerry Bridges describes self-control as follows. He says self-control is control of one's desires, cravings, impulses, emotions, and passions. It is saying no when we should say no. Here it comes. It is moderation in legitimate desires and activities, and absolute restraint in areas that are clearly sinful. Time, you see, is a limited resource. The wise person understands this truth and practices moderation with those things he legitimately enjoys. The fool does not see the need for moderation. He will binge watch movies he enjoys and push back those unfinished tasks and troubling relationships until tomorrow. The fool believes that he has time, it's his own, and he can do with it as he pleases. He recoils at the thought of accountability. This is why the Bible teaches that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. When we procrastinate, we make the same mistake of thinking of ourselves as sovereign. And until this is corrected, we will never see the need to exercise the activities we enjoy with moderation, and stop pushing back our responsibilities for another day. There's one final area in which we can exercise self-control for our time. Exercise self-control to persevere when you are discouraged. Mason Cooley was an American forest known for his brief, witty statements. He's reported to say, "The time I kill is killing me." But one of my favorite statements attributed to him was, "Procrastination makes easy things hard and hard things harder." When we put off things, it feels as if things just got easier, but in reality, we have more work to do now. These are the three ways we exercise self-control in use of our time. And there's 4 words you may remember that help us buy back that time. Take advantage of this time to work on these 4 words. Analyze your time, prioritize your time, biblicize your roles and responsibilities, and then exercise self-control. These are great words for us as we reconsider how to make these challenging times and bring about changes in our lives, all for the better. I'm Phil Moser, and this has been Reconstructing the American Dream, spending your time on what really matters.